The rain-slicked streets of Manhattan gleamed under the neon glow. But Ethan's heart was a storm no city could drown. He stood at the edge of Central Park, his tailored coat soaked, staring at the note in his trembling hand. "Meet me at our spot. Midnight. Caleb." 3 years of stolen glances, whispered promises, and a love that burned brighter than the skyline had led to this moment, and Ethan was about to throw it all away. He was the heir to the Prescott Empire, a name that opened every door in New York but locked his heart in a gilded cage. His family's expectations, boardrooms, mergers, a loveless marriage to seal a business deal suffocated him. But Caleb, with his warm brown eyes and fearless spirit, had become his rebellion, his oxygen. A 23-year-old artist with no pedigree, Caleb had nothing but his heart to offer. And that was enough. Tonight, Ethan would walk away from billions, from his name, from everything, because Caleb was his home. The clock tower chimed midnight. Ethan's pulse raced as he stepped into their hidden alcove, a quiet corner of the park where they'd first kissed under a canopy of stars. But Caleb wasn't there. The air felt wrong, heavy with absence. Ethan's phone buzzed. A single text. "I'm sorry. Can't." His world tilted. Caleb, the one who'd begged him to choose love over legacy, was gone. No explanation. No goodbye. Just a void where their future should have been. Ethan crumpled the note, his breath hitching. He'd burned every bridge for this love, and now it was ash. Why had Caleb vanished? The question clawed at him, but the answer lay buried in secrets neither had dared to speak. The Upper East Side penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel, but to Ethan, it was a prison. Growing up, he'd learned to wear privilege like armor, smiling through charity galas and board meetings while his soul screamed for freedom. His father, Richard Prescott, was a titan of finance, his word law in Manhattan's elite circles. His mother, Eleanor, was a socialite whose warmth had long been replaced by icy ambition. They'd mapped Ethan's life: Yale, a corner office, a wife from the right family. But Ethan had never wanted their world. He wanted Caleb. They'd met 2 years ago at a Greenwich Village art gallery, where Caleb's paintings, raw, vivid bursts of color, had stopped Ethan in his tracks. Caleb, with his paint-splattered jeans and quiet confidence, had been unlike anyone Ethan knew. Their first conversation, over cheap coffee in a diner, lasted until dawn. Caleb spoke of dreams, of painting the world as he saw it, not as it was. Ethan, for the first time, felt seen not as a Prescott, but as himself. Their love grew in secret, stolen moments in dive bars, late-night walks along the Hudson, and whispered confessions in Caleb's tiny Brooklyn apartment. Caleb was a risk Ethan couldn't afford, yet couldn't resist. "You're enough," Caleb had said once, his voice soft but sure. "Not your name, not your money, just you." Those words had unraveled Ethan, stitching him back together in ways he hadn't known he needed. But the Prescotts were relentless. When Richard discovered Ethan's distraction, he'd issued an ultimatum: end it, or lose everything. Ethan had chosen Caleb, ready to trade his inheritance for a life that was his own. He told Caleb everything: his decision to walk away, to start fresh together. Caleb had cried, promised they'd face it side by side. So why, now, was Ethan alone? The next morning, Ethan scoured the city. Caleb's apartment was empty. His phone disconnected. At the gallery, the owner shrugged. He left yesterday. Said he was done with New York. Ethan's chest tightened. Caleb hadn't just left, erased himself. Desperate, Ethan tracked down Caleb's best friend, Mia, a barista with a sharp tongue and fiercer loyalty. He's gone, Ethan, she said, her eyes guarded. He didn't tell me where, but he was scared. Said you'd be better off without him. Scared of what? Ethan pressed, his voice breaking. Mia hesitated, then handed him a sketchbook of Caleb's. Left behind. Inside, Ethan found sketches of their moments together, their first kiss. Ethan laughing in the rain, their hands intertwined. On the last page, a note in Caleb's handwriting. I love you too much to ruin you. Ethan's knees buckled. Caleb hadn't left because he stopped loving him, left to protect him. But from what? The answer lay somewhere in Caleb's past. A shadow Ethan had never fully seen. He clutched the sketchbook, resolve hardening. He'd find Caleb, no matter the cost. He'd prove their love was worth fighting for. Ethan's search began in the margins of Caleb's life. The sketchbook was his only lead. Its pages a map of their love, but also a cipher to Caleb's secrets. He pored over every sketch, every scribbled note, looking for clues. One drawing a lighthouse battered by waves felt different, heavier. Beneath it, Caleb had written, Gloucester, MA, where I became me. Ethan's gut told him this was where Caleb had gone. He rented a car and drove north, Manhattan's skyline fading in his rearview mirror. Gloucester was a small coastal town, its air sharp with salt and memory. Ethan wandered the docks, the sketchbook tucked under his arm, asking locals about a young artist with warm brown eyes. Most shook their heads, but an old fisherman, his face weathered like the cliffs, paused. Sounds like the kid who used to paint by the lighthouse. Haven't seen him in years, though. The lighthouse stood alone, a sentinel against the crashing waves. Ethan climbed its rocky path, the wind biting his face. At its base, he found a faded mural, definitely Caleb's work. All bold lines and hidden pain. It depicted a boy running from shadows toward light. Ethan's heart ached. Caleb had always carried something heavy, something he'd never fully shared. Was this place the key? Back in town, Ethan checked into a small inn and kept searching. He found a community center where Caleb had once taught art to kids. The director, a kind woman named Sarah, recognized Caleb's name. He was here as a teen, she said. Came from a rough home. Got out. Made something of himself. But he never talked much about his past. She hesitated. If he's back, check the old pier. He used to go there to think. The pier was quiet at dusk, the horizon swallowing the sun. Ethan waited, hope fading with the light. Then, a figure appeared, slight, familiar, carrying a sketchpad. Caleb. Ethan's breath caught. But as he stepped forward, Caleb turned, his eyes wide with shock. Ethan. Why are you here? Why did you leave? Ethan's voice cracked, anger and hurt colliding. Caleb looked away, his jaw tight. I had to. You don't understand. Ethan grabbed his arm, desperate. Then make me understand. I gave up everything for you. Caleb's eyes glistened. That's why I left. Your family, they didn't just threaten to cut you off. They threatened me. Ethan froze. Caleb's voice dropped. Your father's people found me. Said if I didn't disappear, they'd make sure I never painted again. They knew things about my past. My family. They could destroy me. Ethan's mind reeled. His father had always been ruthless. But this, why didn't you tell me? He demanded. Caleb's laugh was bitter. Because you'd fight them, Ethan. And you'd lose. I couldn't let you lose your whole world for me. I already did, Ethan said, stepping closer. You are my world. Caleb's resolve wavered, but he pulled away. You don't know everything about me. There's stuff I've never told you. Stuff I'm ashamed of. Ethan's heart twisted, but he held Caleb's gaze. Then tell me now. Let me in. Caleb's story spilled out under the stars. He'd grown up in Gloucester, in a home fractured by addiction and violence. His father was a ghost. His mother a storm of rage and neglect. Art had been his escape, but it couldn't erase the scars or the fear that he'd never be enough for someone like Ethan. I'm not worth your future, Caleb whispered. I'm broken. Ethan took Caleb's hands, his voice fierce. You're not broken. You're the strongest person I know. And I'm not leaving without you. For a moment, Caleb leaned into him, their foreheads touching, the world narrowing to just them. But then Caleb pulled back. I need time, Ethan, to figure out if I can do this, if I can be what you need. Ethan wanted to argue, to hold on, but he saw the fear in Caleb's eyes. I'll wait, he said, voice thick. But I'm not giving up. Caleb nodded, tears falling, and walked into the night. Ethan stood alone, the pier creaking beneath him, knowing the hardest fight was still ahead. Ethan stayed in Gloucester, renting a small room above a bookstore, determined to give Caleb space but not distance. Each morning, he walked the pier, hoping to see Caleb's familiar silhouette. He didn't. Instead, he found traces of him everywhere in the murals around town. In the stories locals told of a quiet kid who'd painted hope into their lives. Ethan clung to these fragments, piecing together the man he loved. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from his family. His father's were cold, demanding his return. His mother's were softer, manipulative. Come home, darling. We can fix this. Ethan ignored them. He'd made his choice, but doubt gnawed at him. What if Caleb was right? What if love wasn't enough to bridge their worlds? One evening, Ethan found Caleb at the lighthouse, sketching the waves. Caleb didn't run this time, but his eyes were guarded. You're still here, he said, almost accusingly. Ethan nodded. I told you I'd wait. Caleb's pencil paused, his voice soft. You shouldn't. I'm a mess, Ethan. My past, it's not just my family. There's more. Caleb led Ethan to a small diner, where they sat in a corner booth, coffee cooling between them. He spoke of his teenage years, of running away at 16 to escape his mother's boyfriend, a man whose cruelty left scars Caleb still hid under long sleeves. He'd survived on the streets, scraping by until art became his lifeline. I lied to you, Caleb admitted, eyes down. When we met, I said I was just a broke artist. I didn't tell you I'd been homeless, that I'd done things to survive I'm not proud of. Ethan reached for his hand, but Caleb pulled back. You're a Prescott. You deserve someone who fits your world, not someone dragging ghosts behind them. Ethan's chest tightened. I don't want someone who fits their world. I want you. Caleb's smile was sad. You say that now. But what happens when the world pushes back? The world did push back. Ethan's father had escalated, freezing his accounts, cutting him off completely. A private investigator trailed Ethan in Gloucester. A silent warning. Ethan didn't live on nothing if it meant Caleb. But Caleb's fear was a wall between them. They'll hurt you to get to me, Caleb said one night, his voice breaking. I can't live with that. Ethan refused to let go. He started working odd jobs, a bookstore clerk, a dockhand, proving he could survive without his family's money. He left notes for Caleb at the pier, small sketches of their memories, each one a plea, come back to me. One day, Caleb responded, leaving a drawing of two figures holding hands under a stormy sky. No note, but it was enough. Caleb was listening. Weeks passed, and slowly, Caleb let Ethan in again. They met at the lighthouse, talked for hours, their hands brushing but never quite holding. Caleb's walls were crumbling, but his fear lingered. What if I let you down? He asked one night, his voice raw. Ethan cupped his face. Steady. You won't. We'll figure it out together. But the past wasn't done with them. One evening, as Ethan left the bookstore, a black SUV pulled up. Two men stepped out, their faces hard. Your father wants a word, one said. Ethan's heart pounded, but he stood his ground. Tell him I'm done. The men exchanged a look, then drove off. Ethan knew it wasn't over. His father's reach was long, and Caleb's safety was at stake. He had to find a way to protect their love before it was torn apart for good. Ethan's life in Gloucester settled into a rhythm, but the threat of his family loomed like a storm on the horizon. He and Caleb were rebuilding, piece by fragile piece. They spent evenings at the lighthouse, Caleb sketching while Ethan read aloud from old novels. Their laughter felt like defiance, but Caleb's eyes still carried a shadow. Ethan sensed he was holding something back, something bigger than his past. One night, Caleb confessed. There's a reason I ran from New York, he said, staring at the waves. Your father's people dug up something I thought I'd buried. Ethan waited, his heart heavy. Caleb's voice was low. When I was 17, I got caught up with some bad people. Did a job, nothing violent, but illegal. They've got proof. Your father threatened to use it against me unless I left you. Ethan's blood ran cold. Blackmail. His father hadn't just threatened Caleb's future, he'd weaponized his past. Why didn't you tell me? Ethan asked, his voice tight. Caleb's eyes glistened. I was ashamed, and I didn't want you to see me as less. Ethan pulled him close. Fierce. Nothing could make me see you as less. We'll fight this. Together. They devised a plan. Ethan contacted Mia, who'd moved to Boston but still had contacts in New York's art scene. She agreed to dig into Richard Prescott's tactics, see if anyone else had been targeted. Meanwhile, Caleb reached out to an old friend from his Gloucester days, a lawyer named Javier who'd helped him escape his past. Javier was skeptical but promised to look into legal protections for Caleb. Days later, Mia called. Your dad's been pressuring other people too. she said. Artists. Small gallery owners, anyone who doesn't fit his world. He's got a network of PIs and lawyers. Ethan's jaw clenched. His father wasn't just after Calebi was cleaning house, erasing anything that threatened the Prescott image. Ethan felt a mix of rage and guilt. This was his family's doing, and Caleb was paying the price. Javier's news was grim. The evidence against Calebi's forged signature on a stolen artwork was enough to ruin his career. Maybe land him in jail. We can fight it, Javier said. But it'll be messy. And expensive. Ethan didn't have money. Not anymore. But he had something else, leverage. He knew his father's business dealings weren't all clean. If he could find proof, he could turn the tables. Ethan and Caleb spent nights combing through old emails and documents Ethan had access to before he'd been cut off. They found hints of shady deals, offshore accounts, questionable partnerships, but nothing concrete. Time was running out. The SUV appeared again, this time outside Caleb's rented room. A note was slipped under his door. Leave now, or the evidence goes public. Caleb's hands shook as he showed Ethan the note. Maybe I should go, he whispered. I'm dragging you down. Ethan grabbed his shoulders, eyes blazing. No. We're in this together. If they want a fight, they'll get one. Caleb nodded, but fear lingered in his eyes. That night, they held each other tightly, the world outside their small room closing in. Ethan knew they needed a miracler, a weapon sharp enough to cut through his father's empire. Ethan's resolve hardened, but the weight of their fight pressed down. He and Caleb moved to a new hiding spot, a friend's cabin outside Gloucester, to stay off his father's radar. The cabin was small, cluttered with art supplies and old furniture, but it felt safe, a bubble where they could be together. Caleb painted again, his brushstrokes bolder, as if reclaiming himself. Ethan watched, falling in love all over again. Mia's digging bore fruit. She found a former Prescott employee, a whistleblower named Lena, who'd been fired for asking too many questions. Lena had documents, emails, financial records hinting at Richard Prescott's illegal dealings. It's not enough to take him down, Lena warned over a secure call. But it's a start. Be careful. He's ruthless. Ethan thanked her, his mind racing. This was their leverage, but using it meant war. Caleb, meanwhile, met with Javier. The lawyer had found a loophole. The evidence against Caleb was old, possibly inadmissible if they could prove coercion. But it would take time, and Caleb's fear was growing. What if we lose? He asked Ethan one night, his voice small. What if I end up in jail, and you're left with nothing? Ethan kissed his forehead. Steady. Then we'll fight from there. I'm not losing you. Their fragile peace shattered when Javier called. Someone's been asking about Caleb in town. You need to move. Panic gripped Ethan. His father's reach was closing in. They packed quickly, leaving the cabin for Boston, where Mia offered her apartment as a safe house. The city felt like a maze, every corner a potential threat. Ethan noticed Caleb withdrawing, his smiles rare, his sketches darker. One night, Caleb broke. I'm scared, Ethan. He admitted, tears streaming. Not just of your dad, off myself. What if I'm not strong enough for this? Ethan held him, whispering, You're stronger than you know. We're stronger together. But doubt lingered. Ethan wondered if his love was asking too much of Caleb. If he was pulling him into a fight he couldn't win. Mia's apartment became their war room. They pored over Lena's documents, piecing together a case against Richard Prescott. They found a pattern: bribes, tax evasion, coercion of small businesses. It was enough to scare his father, maybe enough to negotiate. Ethan drafted a letter, outlining what they knew, demanding the threats against Caleb stop. He didn't send it, not yet. It was their last card, and they had to play it right. As they planned, Caleb opened up more about his past. He spoke of the nights he'd slept in alleys, the hunger that gnawed at him, the shame of choices made to survive. Ethan listened, his heart breaking but also swelling with pride. Caleb had fought his way out of darkness, and now they'd fight together. "I don't deserve you," Caleb said once, his voice soft. Ethan smiled. "You're the only one who ever saw me. That's enough." But the net was tightening. One evening, Mia spotted a familiar SUV outside her building. Ethan's stomach dropped. They had to act fast before his father's men found them. Before Caleb's past was weaponized. The fight for their love was no longer just about them. It was about breaking free from a legacy of control. Ethan held Caleb's hand, their fingers laced, and vowed to see this through. Boston streets buzzed with life, but Ethan and Caleb moved like ghosts, always looking over their shoulders. Mia's apartment was a temporary haven, but the walls felt like they were closing in. Ethan sent the letter to his father, a calculated risk. It outlined the evidence they'd gathered enough to spark an investigation if it went public. The response was silence, which was worse than threats. Ethan knew his father was planning something. Caleb threw himself into his art, painting feverishly as a way to cope. His latest piece was a storm of color, two figures standing against a tidal wave, hands clasped. "This is us," he told Ethan, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. Ethan's heart swelled. Caleb was fighting, not just for them, but for himself. But the fear in his eyes hadn't fully faded. Javier called with news. The evidence against Caleb could be challenged. But they needed a witness from his pasta dealer who'd coerced him into the forgery. Finding them was a long shot. But Caleb remembered a name: Marcus. He'd been a small-time crook in Gloucester, now rumored to be in Boston. Ethan and Caleb tracked him to a dive bar in Southie. Marcus was older, grizzled, but his eyes lit up when he saw Caleb. "Didn't think I'd see you again, kid." After tense negotiations, Marcus agreed to testify if they paid him. Ethan had no money, but Mia pooled her savings, and Javier offered pro bono work. It was a slim chance, but it was something. As they left the bar, Caleb grabbed Ethan's hand, squeezing hard. "Thank you," he whispered, "for believing in me." Ethan kissed him, fierce and quick, the world blurring around them. But their victory was short-lived. That night, the SUV returned, this time with a message delivered in person. A man in a suit handed Ethan an envelope. Inside was a single photo: Caleb, 17, signing the forged artwork. The note read, "Last chance. Send him away, or this goes to the police." Ethan's hands shook. His father wasn't bluffing. Caleb saw the photo and paled. "It's over, Ethan. They've got me." Ethan shook his head, defiant. "No, we've got them too. We'll go public with what we know about my father. Mutually assured destruction. Caleb's eyes widened. That's insane. You'd ruin your family for me. Ethan nodded. You're my family now. They met with Lena, who'd connected with a journalist willing to break the story about Richard Prescott's dealings. It was a gamble exposing his father could backfire, dragging them all into a public scandal. But Ethan was done running. He and Caleb agreed they'd release the evidence, face the consequences, and protect each other. The night before the story went live, they sat on Mia's balcony, the city sprawling below. Caleb leaned against Ethan, his voice soft. I never thought I'd have Thesa love worth fighting for. Ethan kissed his temple. You're worth everything. For the first time, Caleb didn't pull away. They held each other, bracing for the storm, knowing their love was the only thing that could weather it. The story broke at dawn. A headline screaming across news sites, Prescott Empire under fire, allegations of corruption. Ethan and Caleb watched from Mia's apartment, the TV blaring with analysts dissecting Richard Prescott's empire. The evidence Lena's documents, backed by the journalist's investigation, was damning. Ethan's father issued a statement, denying everything. But the damage was done. The world was watching. Caleb's hand trembled in Ethan's. This is real now, he whispered. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. We knew it would be. They'd sent Javier's affidavit about Caleb's coercion to the police, along with Marcus's testimony. It wasn't airtight, but it was enough to cast doubt on the charges against Caleb. For now, they were safe but not free. The backlash was swift. Ethan's phone flooded with calls from relatives, old friends, even his mother, pleading for him to retract the story. You're destroying us, she cried. Ethan hung up, his heart heavy but resolute. He'd chosen Caleb, and he'd live with the consequences. But the cost was higher for Caleb. Online, trolls dug into his past, splashing his teenage mistakes across forums. Caleb read the comments in silence, his face pale. I'm dragging you into this mess, Caleb said, his voice hollow. Ethan knelt before him, fierce. You're not dragging me anywhere. I'm here because I love you. Caleb's eyes softened, but the weight of public scrutiny was crushing him. Ethan vowed to shield him, no matter what. They moved again, this time to a friend's house in Providence, hoping for quiet. Javier called with cautious optimism. The police were backing off Caleb, focusing instead on Richard Prescott's dealings. But Ethan's father wasn't done. A new message arrived, this time through a lawyer. Return, or Caleb's past becomes everyone's business. Ethan tore it up. He was done negotiating with his father's threats. Caleb, though, was unraveling. The stress of hiding, the public shaming, was too much. One night, he broke down, sobbing in Ethan's arms. I'm not worth this, Ethan. You gave up everything, and I'm still a liability. Ethan held him tighter, his voice fierce. You're not a liability. You're my reason. Slowly, Caleb nodded, his tears soaking Ethan's shirt. They fell asleep entwined, clinging to the fragile hope that they could outlast this storm. Days later, a breakthrough came. Lena found a second whistleblower, a former Prescott accountant with proof of tax fraud. The evidence was explosive, enough to force Richard Prescott into a corner. Ethan and Caleb met with the journalist again, handing over everything. "This ends it," Ethan said, his voice steady. Caleb squeezed his hand, a silent promise to see it through. As the new story prepared to drop, Ethan and Caleb stole a moment alone. They walked to a quiet park. The world hushed around them. Caleb's smile was tentative but real. "We might actually win this," he said. Ethan kissed him, slow and sure. "We already have." But deep down, Ethan knew the final battle was coming and it would test their love like never before. The second story hit like a tidal wave. Prescott patriarch faces federal investigation. Richard Prescott's empire crumbled as the FBI raided his offices, seizing records. Ethan watched the news from Providence, Caleb at his side, their hands clasped. The world saw his father's downfall. But for Ethan, it was freedom. He'd broken the chains of his name, not just for himself, but for Caleb. The threats against Caleb stopped. Javier's work paid off, the charges were dropped. The forged artwork deemed inadmissible. Caleb was free, but the scars remained. He struggled with the public's judgment, the whispers of his past. Ethan saw the weight he carried and vowed to help him heal. They moved to a small apartment in Providence. Starting fresh, Ethan took a job at a bookstore. Caleb taught art classes to kids. Their life was simple, but it was theirs. One evening, Caleb showed Ethan a new painting, two figures standing on a cliff. The storm behind them, the sky ahead clear. "This is us now," Caleb said, his voice steady. Ethan's eyes stung. They'd fought a war against his family, against Caleb's past, against a world that tried to tear them apart, and they'd won. Not with money or power, but with love. But the ending wasn't tidy. Ethan's family disowned him completely. His mother's final letter a cold farewell. Caleb still woke from nightmares, haunted by his years on the street. Yet they faced it together. They laughed over burnt dinners, danced in their tiny living room, and planned a future that belonged to them. Caleb's art flourished. His paintings shone in small galleries, each one a testament to his resilience. One night, under a sky full of stars, Ethan took Caleb's hand. "I'd do it all again," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every fight, every sacrifice for you." Caleb's smile was radiant, his eyes clear. "I vanished once because I thought I was saving you, but you saved me." They kissed, the world falling away, their love a quiet triumph. Their story wasn't perfect, but it was real. They'd walked through fire, not just for each other, but for the truth that love could be enough. In a world that tried to break them, they built something strong, a life where they were enough, just as they were.